we're very happy to have with us Anne Hedges from the Montana Environmental Information Center. MEIC is a nonprofit organization that has worked to ensure clean air and water for Montanans for over 40 years through outreach and policy involvement. Anne Hedges is the organization's deputy director and lead lobbyist, and she has worked with MEIC on pollution-related issues for 24 years. She earned a Bachelor's of Science in Environmental Policy Analysis and Planning from UC Davis and a Master's of Environmental Law from Vermont Law School. Thank you so much, Anne, for being with us today.
Thank you.
And can we start by you giving us a little bit about your story and how you came into this work and what your work entails at MEIC?
I think when I was in college, my experience was that somebody needed to do something about the state of the planet, and that was a long time ago. And when I learned that you could actually be a lobbyist on behalf of the environment, I switched my major, I changed my college, and I just jumped into it with both feet. I came to MEIC in 1993 and haven't looked back. It's just been a wonderful experience in which I get to protect people and places every day. And it's fortunate. Not many people fall into a job like this where they're passionate about it, they love what they do, and they feel good at the end of the day. So MEIC is an organization, and there's a lot of states that have organizations like them, that engages in pollution-related issues primarily. We work on clean air, clean water, and a healthy climate. And that is a challenge in a state like Montana, in which you have an abundant coal resource, one of the biggest coal resources in the nation, the largest in the lower 48. You have an abundance of oil and gas resources, but you also have some of the best wind resources in the country, and also some great solar resources and storage opportunities. So we're at this crossroads in our state on whether we want to continue to be an extractive state that is holding on to the past and leading to the demise of people and the planet, or whether we want to enter the new era and really encourage economic development in a new arena that can take us into the future, that can create jobs and a tax base. We have great opportunities, but if we don't take advantage of them, they will be missed opportunities, because other states are doing so. States that are surrounding us that don't have as good a resources as we do for feeding the clean energy demand. And if we don't serve that demand, somebody will. So MEIC feels like the clock is ticking. It's ticking on climate change, and it's ticking on our ability to engage in this clean energy economy. But the fossil fuel industry it's strong, while economically it's fading very much. When you have an industry that feels cornered, that feels like it's facing its demise, it's going to fight harder than it's ever fought before. The companies that have all the CEOs have all the money, they don't live in this state, but they use their workforce as pawns in this scheme to get them short-term revenue. And they're not considering the workforce, and they're not considering transition and how we can move forward and keep everybody employed and maintain a tax base in rural areas. You see these coal companies, they declare bankruptcy overnight, their CEOs get golden parachutes, and the company is gone and the workers are out of luck, and often their pensions go with it. And that's a tragedy, and it's a tragedy that just keeps getting repeated again and again. And we can do better, and we have to do better. But in the meantime, those same corporate executives are using their workforce and using them as political leverage to continue the fossil fuel industry till its last dying breath, which unfortunately could be the planet's last dying breath too. So we're trying to do things we can to help the workforce while transitioning as quickly as we possibly can away from the fossil fuels that the legislature really wants to keep digging and taking out of the ground. The coal industry has been looking for bailouts. They've been looking for government to give them a sweetheart deal and give them an advantage over new energy resources. And so we've been fighting those. And one of those bills that keeps coming up has been proposed by a senator from Colstrip, and he has for basically 3 sessions in a row in Montana proposed legislation that would penalize companies that want to transition away from coal. And his first proposal was in 2015, and it was largely thought that it was unbeatable, that we couldn't possibly stop this legislation from punishing those utilities, out-of-state utilities, that are invested in Colstrip. And Colstrip is one of the biggest coal-fired power plants in the nation. It largely services electricity to out-of-state customers. There's very little in-state ownership. But the workforce is here, and it's a mine-mouth operation, meaning you have hundreds of employees that work at a mine that's adjacent to the power plant. And the power plant employs hundreds of employees. And those are good jobs. They're high-paying jobs, they're good jobs, and those people have had a very good deal for a very long time. And they'd like to continue, and that's understandable. But the planet can't afford for these good jobs to continue exactly as they are. We've got to figure out another way to help those workers earn a decent living, but do it in a way that protects the environment and addresses the existential threat of climate change. So when Senator Ankeny came forward with a bill in 2015 to punish these out-of-state utilities, we were really alarmed, because these are the out-of-state utilities that Montana needs to invest in our wind resources. Montana has an outstanding wind resource, and those utilities have a demand among their customers for increased wind. And Montana has a much better wind resource than those states do, than Washington and Oregon do, or Idaho. And so it's a natural proposition that those companies that are invested in a coal plant could turn around and invest in wind development in Montana. The transmission system already is in place. The resources are there for transitioning over. We've done a lot of studies to make sure that the transmission system could accommodate wind at the same level that it is currently accommodating coal. And all the stars are really aligned. But when you start telling those same companies that as a state, we are going to charge them tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars to exit a coal plant, it makes them fearful of doing business in the state. And so in 2015, we worked closely, for the first time that I can recall, with the Montana Chamber of Commerce, who opposed that bill. We've worked over the years with the Montana Taxpayers Association, an incredibly conservative organization, because in most instances, they understand that idea of penalizing those who would invest, to prevent them from investing. And that just runs counter to any good business proposition. In 2015, we were able to defeat Senator Ankeny's bill just from hard work. And it was a very split vote. It was not at all Democrats versus Republicans or vice versa. It required both, people in both parties, but it was razor thin. It came down to the very last couple days of the legislative session. It was incredibly intense, but at the time we really focused on business. We didn't talk about climate. And that's been our method in the last 3 sessions with that first bill. And then he came back with another bill that was very similar in 2017. And we picked up a couple new allies in that battle. And that was, there were allies, again, who were not Democrat or Republican. They were mainly business. So it was environment and business versus, traditional fossil fuel extraction at the expense of any new economic development in the energy sector. So we built on those alliances for 2 sessions and successfully, counter to a Democratic governor's desire to see that bill pass, counter to legislative leadership who wanted to see that bill pass. We managed to bring together Republicans and Democrats on both sides of the aisle to talk about what is Montana's future looking like? Who's going to invest in our economy? And it's not in the coal industry. The coal industry has done nothing but decline in recent decades. If we punish those investors, they're not going to invest, and Montana's going to be worse off in the long run. And then last session, Senator Ankeny decided that he was going to let somebody else carry the bill. It was the same theme, but it was a different tactic. It was trying to bypass the normal analysis that states go through to determine whether it's in the consumer's best interest to buy into a new energy resource. So every state in the nation has a public service commission. They are the ones who oversee regulated utilities, these monopolies. We've allowed the energy sector to become a monopoly. So across the country, we've set up a system where we have regulators overseeing these monopoly utilities who provide us electricity. And they make sure that our rates are low, and that the companies aren't just building all sorts of new resources like big gas plants, big expensive coal plants, spending a lot of money and getting a 10% rate of return on all of those investments. Your public utility commissions are in charge of making sure that they're doing it in a prudent way, in a way that looks out for consumers and isn't just gluttonous. Well, what Senator Ankeny and Senator Richmond tried was to bypass that process and allow the utility to get a larger share of one of the biggest coal plants in the nation, Colstrip. And it really did create this enormous division right off the bat. And there were a lot of Republicans who jumped in with Senator Ankeny and Senator Richmond. But outside the Capitol, that wasn't the case. There were a lot of Republicans who were scratching their heads saying, this doesn't make sense. And this puts businesses and it puts consumers at a real disadvantage to not have that watchdog, that traditional watchdog, to make sure that your energy bills are reasonable. And so suddenly I started having Republicans that I hadn't talked to in sometimes decades calling me saying, what can we do to stop this bill? Suddenly they're thinking this doesn't make sense, this isn't good for business. And it created this funny mix of people on one side, and these people who say that they want to protect consumers, but when the rubber hits the road, they really don't care about consumers so much. They seem more to care about making the monopoly utility happy at all costs. And so there was a divide even within our Public Service Commission. So the Public Service Commission that is in charge of this type of activity, making sure that utility investments make sense, the Public Service Commission, 3 of them said, you don't need us. Go ahead and buy more of the plant without the Public Service Commission oversight to make sure consumers are protected. We don't need any sideboards on this purchase. It was shocking. And we had a bipartisan response. I worked with a lot of Republicans and Democrat former Public Service commissioners who happily joined on to a letter saying this is inappropriate. It is inappropriate to bypass the very process we have to protect consumers. And it wasn't about climate change. I mean, for us, it certainly was, that was the bottom line, but we were also concerned about what happens when people can't pay their bills. What happens when you don't need any more clean energy because you have committed to a coal plant for another 25 years. In an era when every other utility is moving away from coal because it's too expensive compared to cleaner energy resources, it was unfathomable that Montana would lock in to coal for decades to come. So these Republicans were seeing that from an economic perspective, and Democrats were seeing it from both economic and a climate change perspective. And suddenly, it was the funniest mix of people at the hearing. You couldn't tell, based upon people's histories, which side of the debate they would fall on. And when people would stand up at the hearing and be an opponent, there were a lot of oohs and ahs. There were people saying, what? How'd that happen? It's like, I've been talking to that person for a couple of weeks and I'm as shocked as you are, but they are right there. They get it. They get how dangerous this is to the future of our energy economy. And suddenly, there was a vote on the House floor, and we thought we were going to lose that vote. We worked really hard, but based upon what, the votes that had been occurring, we thought we were going to lose. And suddenly the bill went down overwhelmingly. Republicans, they staged a coup and they said, we're not going to put up with this. And they were joined, of course, by a lot of Democrats, not 100% of Democrats. There were a lot of Democrats who were siding with unions, who had been convinced that this was the only way they were going to be able to keep jobs. And that's an unfortunate split that we need to figure out how to mend. But suddenly we had this large population of Republicans joining the Democrats and crushed the bill, just crushed it out of the water. And most people didn't see it coming. There is a point in it is not a line, or we like to think of opposite ends of the spectrum. That is not true. It is very much a circle. And if you can find out that place where conservatives and liberals meet, we could get a lot done. And instead, all we did was stop bad legislation. I mean, the ideal would be to try to figure out how to move things forward. And there is a contingent of very conservative people who want economic development in the state and understand that means clean energy and access to clean energy development. And if we do things that put up roadblocks, Montana is going to be the loser. When Wyoming is developing clean energy resources at a far faster pace than Montana, it makes a lot of people say, wait, what about us? We want that tax base too. We want those jobs. If we keep looking back and saying, how come we can't live like we did, 20 or 30 years ago, then we're going to get stuck in the past and get left behind. It's trying to figure out how to move forward and keep those workers employed without letting them just be pawns for these companies that really don't care about their future well-being. They just want them as short-term workers. We want to make sure that those folks have jobs and benefits and can buy homes and send their kids to school without a problem going forward, even as the coal industry fades away. So that's the challenge we face, but I think we can get there. And I think we've built some relationships across the aisle in the state over this issue that, when life gives you lemons, you make lemonade. I think that Montana has made some lemonade. And I think we're in a good spot to move forward.
Thank you for that. As we're on that note, do you have any other specific calls to action for folks watching?
I think that the call to action is don't try to hammer a square peg into a round hole. We care about climate change. We want to do things and change our energy system because of climate change. But other people want to do it for other reasons, and those are valid as well. And work with what you have. So don't try to force people to care about the things you care about. Show them why the things you care about make sense to them from their perspective. And if we try to force people to care about climate change and they don't believe in climate change, we're fighting a losing battle, and we don't have time for that. The climate can't wait. You try to find those places where we intersect, where we can agree, and you use those, and those are what you talk about. Those are what you work on. And in the meantime, we have to find a way to help the workforce. I mean, we just do. And I don't want them to be left behind. I know a lot of them hate me. They hate my guts. But yet I have tried 4 different ways to try to get companies to contribute to transition funding. And I'm not going to stop. We are going to find a way to get all the companies invested in Colstrip to put money forward for transition funding. That wouldn't happen without climate activists demanding it in all sorts of settings, and it's happening all over the country. We care about the environment because we also care about human beings, and we don't want anyone to lose their job and not be able to take care of their kids. So we can do it. There are models out there for how to do it, but we have to get past the rancor and the anger to really have that conversation about how to move forward, and that's challenging.
And what do you say to folks that defend coal-powered plants such as Colstrip as far as the jobs that they generate versus renewable energy?
You know, there is no panacea. There's no silver bullet for the problems we're facing. And to say that we can just switch over to wind and that will take all those coal jobs, that's not true. It isn't. It is going to be a multifaceted approach, and it is going to be far better if it's well planned than if it's haphazard. And the Colstrip owners aren't going to give a lot of advance notice. They did this when they decided to close Unit 1 and 2. They gave 6 months advance notice to closing those 2 units. We had negotiated an agreement with them in 2016 that they would keep those 2 units running until 2022. They've already closed, and the owners didn't give them much notice. And that same thing is going to happen with the other 2 units, the bigger units. We can either let that happen to us and have a lot of people suddenly unemployed, or we can think about how to transition those jobs to other things. And there are other things. Do I have all the answers? Absolutely not. Could I use help from the workforce? Absolutely. But we know that there's a giant wind farm that's being proposed just north of Colstrip that wants to put energy on that transmission line. They're working as hard as they can to get that project up and running as soon as possible. That's encouraging. And there are workers at Colstrip who could go work on that, on those windmills. But all the workers can't do that. But the mine there has contaminated water for miles. It is a mess. And that's going to take a lot of workers to clean up. And the more rigorous the standards for cleanup, the more people are going to be employed, the cleaner the water, and the more likelihood there's going to be other economic development in that area. If you create a sacrifice zone by decreasing all of your environmental regulations, then you are not going to attract other businesses to your community. You are going to guarantee the demise of your future. And that is not acceptable. Same thing with the power plant. The power plant has 800 acres of leaking ash ponds. And the company's most recent proposal for cleaning it up leaves contamination in sight above the standard for 100 years. We can do better. Those are jobs. I mean, we could create a lot of jobs in the next 20 to 40 years requiring adequate cleanup of those coal ash ponds, unless the companies get their way and they don't have to clean it up, and they leave a lot of this ash in place. So in some instances, the ash is sitting in groundwater. It's in the groundwater table, and the company doesn't want to excavate that coal ash. It wants to just wait and see how contaminated the groundwater will get. We know the groundwater is already contaminated around it, so why wouldn't we require excavation and storage of that contaminated waste? This is a toxic waste. It's full of heavy metals. Why wouldn't we build new waste sites and store that waste high and dry in a place that's safer? They can guarantee that the water table can get cleaned up over time, and you can be more attractive to other businesses. If you don't do that, then the town of Colstrip is going to be a Superfund site, and that's not in the town's best interest. So it's going to be a complex set of responses and industries and investments. It's not going to be any one thing. And that's scary. I mean, it's scary for the workers. They want something that is simpler than that type of complex chemistry to make their community continue to work. But that's not going to happen. And it's not happening anywhere. Coal plants are closing overnight. Coal mines are closing overnight, and the workforce is left stranded. We have an opportunity to plan for it, and if we don't, then shame on us.
Can you speak to the argument that possibly in Montana we don't have the potential for renewables, that we're using as many as we can now, as a lot of the arguments are currently saying?
So when you have one utility saying it can't have any more renewables, and you have utilities all over the nation, including in Texas and Iowa and really conservative places, that are succeeding at higher renewable penetration, you know it's possible. It is possible to have much higher wind penetration, the use of wind or the use of solar than Montana has. We are laggards. We are way behind the curve in what our opportunities and our potential are, and other states are doing it. To say that we can't do it, it's ignoring reality and the reality that other utilities are living with every single day. Is it more complicated? Yes, it is. But we're pretty smart, and people are pretty smart all over the country or all over the world. And they are figuring out how to manage a more complex energy system. When our utility says it can't possibly do it, they're not telling the truth. They can't do it and make as much money, perhaps. I don't know if that's true, but I think that that's their motivating factor. But that's not the metric by which we should be measuring. You know, how much money can our utility gouge us for? The measure should be how possible is it? How good is it for the environment? How good is it for consumers? How good is it for business? Instead of how good is it just for the utility? We need a balanced approach, and the utility just is thinking about it as a monopoly would, as monopolies do, which is why we regulate monopolies in the energy sector. They think about their bottom line and their corporate bonuses. We need to balance that out with thinking about consumers. So is it going to be simple? No, of course not. Is it being done? Yes, it is. And is it possible in Montana? Absolutely. But if we don't do it, then we lose. Our energy will become more expensive. We will be some of the last people around who are still holding on to the past and not moving into the future. And we will continue to have escalating electricity bills.
Can you take us into the day in the life of a lobbyist for those of us who aren't familiar with the day-to-day, specifically with the work with the Colstrip bill? What did that look like for what you were doing? Were you in the sessions? Were you taking calls, your education, your outreach? What does that position look like?
All of the above. We don't have big resources. We don't have a lot of money to take people out to dinner, to wine and dine legislators. That's just not our style. So we are all about making sure that people understand what is going on outside of the halls of the Capitol so they can engage with their elected officials. If the elected officials don't hear from their constituents, then all they hear from are the high dollar lobbyists in the Capitol. And we are few, they are many. I am a lobbyist. I not degrading the value of lobbyists. We have a citizen legislature. You have a lot of people who just simply don't know much about a lot of the issues, especially energy, which is really dense. And so we have to help those legislators understand the issues, make that information accessible to them. We have to help their constituents understand the issues and understand how that directly impacts their lives, and have them contact their legislators, have them contact the governor. We have to educate. That's primarily what we do. So much of my job is talking to people in the halls of the Capitol, talking on the phone to people outside the halls of the Capitol, and writing about what the facts are about the whatever bill it is that is being proposed, and the pros and cons of that bill. And if you oppose a bill and you don't address its pros, then you will lose. You have to acknowledge that the other side has points. And so sometimes that results in negotiated agreements and amendments on a bad bill to make it slightly better. And that's the best you can do. But in these bills that Senator Ankney and others have been proposing, there's no middle ground. It's not like you can make those bills better, because the fundamental purpose of those bills is to keep an uneconomic coal plant operating long into the future, past its useful life, past its economic life. And so there's nothing there to negotiate. So that's, in that instance, it is just trying to defeat it. So acknowledging the need to address the issues they raise, but talking about other ways to do it than through that measure.
Thank you so much for being with us today, Anne. It's very invaluable information for not only Montanans to be aware of, but also those outside of Montana that might be dealing with similar issues with energy sources and industry, and also outside of the US. This type of work is happening all over the world, and we appreciate the insight and the education that you bring to us for actions to move us forward to a good place.
Together we can get there.